So, huge news for women's football in Canada. The first professional women's soccer league called the Northern Super League. Do we need another Super League title?
Yes. Everything has to keep Super League. That's it. Everyone.
That's the rules. It's launching tomorrow, and Rach is, of course, flying out there to watch the very first game. So we thought we'd dive into this new league and Canada soccer more generally. So the competition is the vision of former Canada international Diana Matheson. She's a co-founder of a sports management company called Project 8, who own the league alongside the 6 clubs involved, and they will run the league too. She said from the outset, "We are thrilled to announce this update to soccer fans across Canada as we take a big step forward to our season opener in April. After years without professional women's domestic soccer league, the Northern Super League and its 6 founding clubs will fill a significant void in Canada and bring about meaningful change coast to coast." A really exciting moment in Canadian sports history. So just to add some further context there, so the NSL, not to be confused with the WSL or the NWSL, will feature 6 founding clubs: Vancouver Rise FC, Calgary Wild FC, AFC Toronto, Ottawa Rapid FC, Montreal Roses FC, and Halifax Tides FC. Such Canadian names.
I was going to say, I wonder what made them think of the little word after their
names,
team.
Like Maplewood FC. Like it kind of feels like, yeah, it kind of feels like that, doesn't it? These teams will compete in a 25-game regular season, facing every other team 5 times.
Jesus, that's like Man City Chelsea every week.
Isn't it just? It's like Groundhog Day, but season long. The top 4 teams will qualify for 2-legged semi-finals, with the National Championship final in mid-November. And Canadian soccer legend Christine Sinclair, who else is serving as an advisor? Of
course she is.
I mean, if you're going to get an advisor, she's your number one go-to for sure. Rach, what are your first impressions of the league ahead of your trip out there?
About time. I think it's really exciting for Canada to be having a professional soccer league finally. So I'm really excited about that. I think I'm intrigued that it's just the 6 teams at the moment. I'm sure that will grow. But I think if we get into the kind of setup of the league, which I think is really interesting, because what's super unique is it's quite rare in a country that is, football is relatively well developed, arguably. They're a top 10 team still, I think, but they've been up in and around it for a long time. It's quite unique to be starting something brand new from scratch, like a league. And it kind of, we've been talking a lot about what changes could be made at the WSL. How can we tweak things? What can we learn from? And how difficult it is to kind of change things as you're moving. Brian Sorensen, I think, used a great analogy once where he spoke about trying to fix the plane while you're flying. Like, it's really a difficult thing to do. And actually, it's quite unique to be able to build a league from scratch. And there, if we go into it, each NSL team is expected to have $1.6 million initial salary cap for 20 to 25 players on their roster, and the minimum player salary is $50,000. For comparison, Spain's top flight women's league has a minimum salary of approximately $25,000, and in Italy it's less than $40,000. That in itself, having a good minimum salary cap, is really interesting. That's something that they can definitely have learned from other leagues. Franchises will be allowed up to 7 foreign players and 1 marquee player whose salary won't count towards the cap. So to put that into context, 2 years ago, the NWSL had a salary cap of 1.375 million. And for the 2025 season, the NWSL's base salary cap will now be 3.3 million, right? So like a massive change. But I think the fact that they're setting salary caps from the get-go, they're thinking about how many foreign players you can bring in, marquee signings, like all these things are kind of in place from the get-go. So it'll be really interesting to see how that impacts teams, how that impacts gaps or whatever between teams. Will we see a really competitive league? I'm just intrigued to see how it plays out, because all of these things have been thought about beforehand rather than trying to implement them when it's already happening.
I think it's that. There's a couple of things there they've introduced that have already been tried and tested by other leagues. So they've had the benefit of everyone else's experience to kind of go in and think about, how competitive the league is going to be and how we maintain competitiveness. So I think we discussed, it was about last month or so, about the introduction of the salary caps, making sure that, you're not in a situation like we're kind of seeing a bit with Chelsea, where you've got a kind of open budget that you can kind of bring in all these players and kind of, end to end just win the league every single season, and kind of you have that mentality, whereas you've got, players that would be entering the league, less budgets, less investment, and then you kind of create that gap already. But it kind of feels like you're setting the teams off already in a bit of a more even playing field.
It's something Diana Matheson said. She said, our focus is on competitive salaries, player benefits, along with our vision to develop and empower players, which has allowed the Northern Super League to start off in the most impactful way. I can't wait for Canadians to see these athletes take the pitch. So I think having former players involved as well, and seeing the struggles around the world and other leagues and the things that players have been calling for and all that kind of stuff, I think makes it really interesting to be able to take all those pieces and put it together and try and develop this league. And I think over time it could be really interesting. You're not going to get like massive names going over there yet. You know, this is a brand new thing. You'd be taking a punt kind of going over there to see how it goes. But I think it could be really interesting in terms of how it develops and the kind of talent it maybe attracts.
Yeah, 100%. And I think just to add on top of that, I think having a minimum player salary is something that I definitely do advocate for. I think across the board in any country. I think also setting it around a $50,000 mark. I mean, I'm not too sure what the conversion rate and what the kind of situation is.
It's not huge.
It's not massive, but I think you have to appreciate. I think when if you pay athletes a ridiculously low sum of money, things like petrol, things like being able to afford, good nutrition, things like being able to afford a gym membership outside of your training, things like just being able to like take some holiday when you actually get holiday and being able to go somewhere nice to kind of get away from things or going to travel to go and see family and friends that you've not seen for ages. Like your salary cap's not just about trying to afford all the fancy things. It's actually about providing base things that are good for your mental health and nutrition and welfare and well-being. So the introduction of a minimum player salary, I think I'd always advocate for, and it's something I definitely would like to see rolled out in the WSL.
It's about £27,000.
So not great, to be honest.
No, but then, yeah. But it's a livable salary, which I think is really important. And I think the fact that there's not going to be loads of players on a load of money with half the squad on nothing as well is, again, it's just another thing that they've looked at and said, right, what's the absolute minimum we must provide? So, and
I think it's also about looking at the entry requirements for being in the league. So things like, the maternity provisions and looking at, the accommodation and the mental health well-being support and things like that. I think those also add to, what the league is offering. So yeah, obviously it's numbers, but also additional support for players is always welcome. So what Canada Soccer as a federation is putting into this league is obviously absolutely huge. The NSL will receive $1 million annually from Canada Soccer, matching what the national governing body gives the men's Canadian Premier League. It does feel like this is a bit of a sign that Canada Soccer are really taking women's football seriously.
Yeah, I mean, $1 million isn't huge, but the fact that it's the same as what they give the men's league, I think, is important. Matheson apparently presented a women's soccer plan to Canada Soccer back in 2021, and the discussions didn't really go anywhere, which is what resulted in her finding Project 8 Sports and ultimately developing this league. So, the fact that that's just one thing to bear in mind. I think for Canada Soccer, if it's pretty easy for them to just give money like they do in the men's and have it be run separately, then great. But I think in terms of growing the game in Canada and not legitimising it necessarily, but showing that they give a shit more, I think is really important. And that's only going to benefit the national team. It's going to create more opportunities for young girls to play. They don't have to leave the country in order to play professionally, which I think is really important to the whole kind of pyramid of football within Canada. And it's difficult because North America generally is a sports heavy culture and place, and you're competing with a lot of other very well funded sports. So I know that can be difficult, especially in Canada. You've got so many other sports that people love. They've got Canadian football, which is like American football, obviously ice hockey, obviously baseball. So it can be a saturated environment. So the fact that they're setting it up well, getting funding from the federation, really important. It just feels like they're trying to make sure they've got really good foundations, which I think is really important, because sometimes we try to run before we can walk.
Definitely. So through a multi-year deal, the ESPN Plus streaming service will cover 40 NSL games live. This includes the opening match tomorrow between Vancouver Rise and Calgary Wild, which sounds like a battle between horses and mounties, and it's going to be in the forest, and it's going to be played with I like moose hair balls. That's the impression that I get. That's the visual imagery that's coming from this.
They're going to be great photos.
I was going to say, Rach, you let me know. Obviously, you're going to the game.
I'm afraid it's just football.
It's just football. Yeah, it's just on a pitch. Everything's completely normal.
It's in BC Place, by the way.
Okay.
BC Place is where England beat Canada in the quarterfinals of the 2015 World Cup.
That's super interesting.
54,000. So a really cool stadium to kick off in.
Okay, well, no. Well, obviously, let us know how it goes afterwards. We'll catch up with you next week when you're back. But yeah, really, really exciting game. There's going to be Afghanistan midfielder Fakunda Mataj, who became Calgary Wild's first signing and will be their captain. Former Leicester City manager and Arsenal assistant coach Lydia Bedford. Wondered where she'd got to. Is the club's first head coach. Lydia is one of the few female English coaches out in Canada. Obviously, Casey Stoney became the head coach of Canada women's national team back in Jan, and former head coach of England under-17s Natalie Henderson also recently joined her as assistant coach. It's quite nice to see English coaches pushing themselves outside of England. We've had a fair few WSL departees kind of head further afield. Not just to Canada. We've had obviously Carla Ward going to Ireland, Emma Hayes US, Nick Cushion US, and now back again. But yeah, do we like to see sort of the WSL managers do the rotations in England, but also get more experience and sort of rotate back again?
I guess progress takes time in terms of coaching opportunities in the UK, and there are only so many top jobs ultimately. So if coaches can go and get opportunities and experience elsewhere, I think it's really good. I mean, I was pretty gutted that Natalie Henderson left the FA, but then to see her turn up as assistant coach for the Canada national team is a brilliant opportunity for her and will only serve, I think, England in the long run should she return into the FA again. Ideally, it'd be great if they all gathered this wonderful experience and then come back and impart the wisdom in England and the UK. We'll see. But, like I said, there's only so many top roles, so it's natural for them to go spread their wings elsewhere. I think it's great that they're getting these kind of top roles as well. It gives you a lot more responsibility and you learn loads about how you have to manage every aspect of a team. So, it's good to see, I think.
It's 2030 and Emma Hayes and Casey Stoney have returned to the WSL.
I was thinking like Casey Stoney and Nat Henderson are the new duo at the Lionesses or something.
Oof. Casey Stoney and Emma Hayes have taken over Serena's job as England managers. Can we see it?
I think Emma Hayes has got the absolute peak job at the moment.
I was going to say, but after she's won the World Cup in 2027, she's already won the Olympics. After that point, 2030, she's like, you know what? I've always wanted to bring Harry up back in the UK again. I've missed it. I missed the WSL. It was so much fun travelling up to Liverpool at the weekends. Really missed those games, and she's back.
Maybe. I'm sticking to the Stoney Henderson duo.
Okay, fine. The launch of this league is a significant milestone for women's sport in the country, but Canada Soccer has obviously been at the heart of a lot of controversy in recent years. Just last year at the Paris 2024 Olympics, staff from the Canadian Soccer Association were found to be using drones to spy on a New Zealand training session. Dronegate, I loved talking about this last year. Obviously, Canada then received a 6-point deduction in the tournament. We had Canadian sports journalist Ha Yohao join us on the pod to talk all about Spygate back in August when it happened. So definitely go back and have a listen to that. But it feels like, I think, Rach, it's that moment of switching between, the NSL is a really important for kind of restoring everyone's faith in Canada Soccer's reputation. It did take obviously a massive hit. It was a massive, the ethics and morals of the Canada Soccer Federation, it felt like that was in question last year, and now it feels like this is maybe going some way to restoring that.
Well, yeah, but that was on top of what happened, I think, was it in 2021-22 when Canadian soccer players went on strike because of a pay dispute, and then the Canadian Soccer Association threatened to sue their players if they didn't play. So, it wasn't a good look. We'd had a lot of reporting around that as well. We had some really impressive players. Janine Becky comes to mind that stood up and spoke out against it. There was a parliamentary review or one of those kind of situations where they all sat in a room and it was Canada Soccer Association. Their reputation wasn't brilliant, and then they kind of seemed to come back together, and then Dronegate happened. So Dronegate wasn't the only controversial thing that happened. So I'm hoping this is putting soccer on the map again for Canada. And as I said, I'm just thinking more about how it could help grow the team and give opportunities to young girls who want to play soccer but maybe don't feel like leaving the country is the option for them. So it could be a very exciting time.